going on, everybody? Welcome into 104 Through the Fans Face Off. Sean Drotar, Rachel V. Hill, hanging out with you to talk all things Colorado Avalanche. Sean, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Nice
Good.
to
I'm
be
happy
here
to
again.
hear. Yeah, no kidding. It's been a while, but we're happy to have you on here. And of course, we're rounding out the rest of the final or regular season, as we approach the playoffs. It seems like the regular season has just been going on forever. I'm ready for the playoffs. But are you worried, Sean? Obviously, the Avs have recently been struggling. I know this is the question everyone has.
They have let some bad habits seep into their play of late. This is the first 4-game regulation losing streak since 2019. That's obviously something of a concern. Now, to be fair, a lot of this has to do with the fact that they have injuries, they have guys resting, there are a lot of other issues there. But this is a team that decided a while back, really a couple weeks back, that the President's Trophy was secondary to health. And given what they've dealt with over the last few seasons, I think that makes sense. The problem is they're playing sort of a sloppy game of late. The last 2 games, they've allowed 4 goals in a period in each game. That sort of thing can't happen. Tonight, it probably won't, even against a good Blues team. Devon Toews is scheduled to come back and play today.
Okay, let's get into those injury updates now. Like you mentioned, Devon Toews, we're excited to have him back in the lineup. Mikko Rantanen is supposed to return on Thursday. He was skating. And then Gabe Landeskog expected for game 1 of the playoffs. Excited to get all of these guys back out on the ice. Who is going to bring the most for this Avalanche team?
You know, odd as it sounds, it's probably Toews, because if the Avalanche can limit their shots, they'll be all right. They have enough firepower to outscore most teams on most nights, even if they're short players. They've been short players, whether it's been McKinnon, Rantanen, Landeskog, Kadri, Nichushkin, you name it. Virtually everybody has been out at some point this season, and the Avs are still one of the top scoring teams in the league. So the concern is limiting those shots. And if they can limit those shots, then they can put Darcy Kemper in a better position to win those games. He needs to get a little sharper as well, but I think the defense is going to be first and foremost what they have to get right. Toews is probably the most underrated defenseman in the entire league. Remember, on about 20 teams, he's their number 1 guy, and it's probably not even close. That's how lucky the Avalanche are and how loaded they are up and down their roster. But yeah, you'd sure like to get that top line of McKinnon, Landeskog, and Rantanen reassembled as soon as possible, too.
So he missed the last game he played was April 16th, which was the last game that the Avalanche won, too. So a little bit of connection right there. But specifically, when you look at what they need to do better on the defensive side of the puck, what is it?
Well, they need to make sure they're in better shape when it comes to positioning, to make sure that they're steering their guys into the right place. They're not chasing into the corners. You've seen that a lot. And they're making sure they clear out the traffic in front of the goal mouth. Too many guys are being able to set up, and then there's being able to set up there unmolested. That just can't happen. So this team has to be a little bit sharper in that regard. They have to make sure that there isn't a tendency. I think with the talent of the Avalanche's defense, there is a tendency to think that you can always jump. You're ready to just jump into the play or make a break or counter punch or something like that. And that's good to do, but it needs to be sort of a bonus, not an expectation, especially while you're down guys.
Jared Bednar has been pretty honest about the way he thinks this Colorado Avalanche team has been playing. And a lot of times when you ask coaches these sort of things, they kind of give you like brush off your shoulder type answers. Do you think that this is just Jared Bednar believing in his team enough to know that they're able to get back on track before the playoffs? Or do you truthfully just think that he's an open, honest guy and he doesn't really care if other media is talking about him?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, I think he knows he doesn't have his full team. And I think he knows they're expected to have their full team. You know, Toews comes back tonight, as you put up on the screen there. Rantanen will be back this week. Landeskog is expected to be back for game 1, which is next week. So you'd love to have a game or 2 lead up time where these guys could all roll it together in a couple games and get your rhythm back. But when you're talking especially about that top line, those guys have played together for a while now. There's not going to be a lot of need to make sure they get rhythm back. The interesting part is going to be what they do when the playoff roster rolls around. Are some of the additions like Josh Manson, who had a nice debut and has really looked not quite as sharp ever since. Andrew Cogliano, who I think they kind of wanted as an extra body for the playoff run, but maybe not a guy on that 4th line. Where do you put them? What about a guy like Nicholas Aube-Kubel, who as the year goes on just kind of seems to turn up in the right places at the right time? So trying to figure out who you're going to put on that roster, who's going to skate every night. Do you want a McDermott dressed? Do you want him on the ice? These are the decisions that Bednar is going to have to start making, and he's probably making them now, but you have to wait until everyone's healthy until you're 100% sure of who you want to put on the ice.
funny you mentioned McDermott because we have 3 players who will not be participating in tonight's game against the Blue, Jack Johnson, Curtis McDermott, and then Ben Myers as well are all out tonight. Who will this Avalanche team miss most?
Probably Johnson, in part because you're looking for more veteran defense in this case. But with Taves back, I think you'll be fine there. Myers has been a nice addition, but his addition was always about next year. This was just if it was baseball, they'd say it was the cup of coffee. He's just up there to see how he can fare against NHL players while they have guys down, while they didn't really matter if they were winning or losing. And they wanted to get the idea for speed to see what Myers could be maybe next year. Remember the Avs, and boy, you don't want to think ahead of it right now. But that entire second line of Kadri, Nichushkin, and Burakovsky are all unrestricted free agents. So you're going to have to expect, probably won't get them all back. You want to know what a guy like Myers can do if he can make that roster next year, if that's necessary.
Okay, interesting. I was unaware that they're all free agents going into next season. Good to know. There, a lot can happen in the NHL tonight, and we're kind of trying to figure out who the Avs are going to play in the playoffs. So there's a lot that can go on. But right now, it's the Stars, Pred, and Vegas are the top contenders. And again, tonight we're going to find out a lot of answers to if Vegas is going to get eliminated. I feel like a lot of Avalanche fans are Dallas Star fans tonight. So who do you want the Avs to play in the playoffs first round?
Well, I know the team I quite frankly don't want them to play is the one they're likeliest to play, and that is the Stars. The Stars are the only team to beat the Avalanche twice in regulation this year. They've done it in Denver. They've done it in Dallas. They play the kind of game that the Avalanche sometimes have trouble with. They make things very difficult to move through the middle of the ice. They kind of chop it up, make it ugly. The Avs can't really use their skating and their passing to the level that they're expected to. So Dallas is probably a bad first-round matchup for them. Vegas is rounding into form, although if Dallas wins in regulation tonight, Vegas is out. I don't think there's any Avs fans shedding any tears for that. And Nashville is a dangerous team. Out of those 3, I think I'd rather have the Predators, but none of them are going to be easy. This is the NHL. These are teams that have given the Avs trouble, each of the 3. And in the NHL, look, this isn't the NBA. 8 seeds not only win rounds, they win Stanley Cups. So when the playoffs starts, you might as well throw the seedings out the window. These things are all pretty close to even, Steven. But yeah, if you were to pick a team for the Avs to select, if they got to pick their team, it's probably Nashville. But they're just going to let the chips fall where they may. That's something the Avalanche and Jared Bednar have made very clear over the last couple of weeks. They're worried about getting healthy, and they think if they're healthy, there isn't a team out there that can beat them 4 times out of 7.
Okay, now for me, I want the Vegas Golden Knights because of revenge, obviously, for so many reasons. I feel like Avalanche fans, I feel like the Vegas Golden Knights are like the number 1 hated team for the Avalanche and for a lot of fans. So, of course, I'm like, let's bring them on first round, knock them out, be done with it. But I think anyone besides the Stars, like you said, will be a good matchup for the Avalanche. And in good matchup, I mean, hopefully they can just roll right over them and move straight into the second round. But Florida can win the President's Trophy tonight if they get more points versus Boston than obviously Colorado and the Blues. You mentioned earlier that the Colorado Avalanche don't care about the President's Trophy. Should fans care?
No. I mean, the Avs had it last year. What good did it do? Now, the funny thing is there's this notion that the President's Trophy is somehow a curse. That's actually not the case. The team that wins the President's Trophy is still the likeliest team to win the Stanley Cup every year. It's just that the Stanley Cup playoffs are such a gauntlet to run through that the top seed often doesn't make it. So it's not like the NBA or even Major League Baseball or even football. It's a more difficult playoffs to get into. So the President's Trophy would be nice. But for the Avs, health is most important. And in this case, they're still likely to end up with the second best record, almost impossible for them not to. And so if that's the case, you're only worried about the 7th game of the Stanley Cup Finals, which in this case, were the both teams to get there, that would take place in Florida. But if you're the Avs, you'll cross that bridge when you come to it. It's nothing that they need to be pursuing right now.
Absolutely. Man, that June 30th date. Oh, it gets exciting to even be talking about. Why are the NHL playoffs so much harder than any of the other playoffs?
You know, that there's a lot of good questions to ask about that. And I think people who have covered hockey for a really long time sometimes struggle to answer it. I guess the easiest answer first is that a lot of it depends on the goalie. If you have a really hot goaltender who can stand on his head, steal a game or two, maybe shut a team out, and all of a sudden you've tipped the series. And if things are more or less even, now that's what turns a game on its head. Obviously, injuries are a concern as well. Every team that comes in with injuries puts themselves behind the 8 ball. That's exactly why the Avalanche are finishing this regular season the way they are. But the truth is that in any given game, any team can win in hockey. It's kind of like baseball in general. In baseball, if you look at a series of 7, you can probably guess who will win. But if you're picking any single game, you don't really know. It means it doesn't really have any factor on it because that's why they play 162. In hockey, think of how many. This is the sport that has to have 3 columns, right, for its stats, because that many games go to overtime or to shootouts. So this is a league that just by and large it is a tight league. It is not like basketball where even if you have a Nathan McKinnon, he can't just skate through everybody all the time and get an easy goal like LeBron James or John Morant can go through and over and around. So the sport itself is different. It is more of a team-oriented sport, and there's no real way for a star to completely take it over for the most part. And that, again, leads it to being more of a fine line and a narrow margin for error in any playoff series.
Do you anticipate Darcy Kemper to play every single playoff game?
Yes. As long as he's healthy, yes. That's usually the way you do it. You go with your number one, unless for some reason there's an injury or he's played very poorly. The Avs, if everything goes the way they want it to, Darcy Kemper will be the only guy in the net for the playoffs for the Avalanche.
Does that make you at all worried about what we saw in the regular season? Because it seemed like every once in a while they have to give him a break. It seemed like he was begging for a break at certain points. And obviously, playoffs are too much stretch of a lot of games of hockey. Is that concerning at all?
No, because you don't have the back-to-backs and the 3 games in 4 nights. So those are the things in which you really worry about guys getting fatigued, or sometimes the day game after a night game. So those don't happen in the playoffs at all. There's a day of rest. So no, I don't think that's a concern. But you're right. Kemper at times has needed a break. And in the last week and a half or so, he hasn't played that well, although we've sort of addressed some of that's Kemper, some of that's the defense. The Avs right now are just sort of on cruise control, which is good positioning-wise, but kind of bad because they're going to have to go to game 1 and apparently just flip a switch, and that's not ideal. But in Kemper's case, you go look at his numbers month over month over month. And right up until the last 2-3 weeks, this guy has done nothing but get better every single month of the season. And that tracks with what we knew about him coming into the season. You and I did this at the early part of the season. And I talked to a lot of people when the Avalanche had acquired Kemper, and they also basically said the same thing. Because he's a big goaltender, he's not very nimble. He's not going side to side from pole to pole all the time. He's just not that guy. He relies on size and positioning. So that means you have to be really familiar with the players in front of you, where they like to set up, where they'll steer a guy when he's coming down the wing. All these sort of things you have to know. And that just takes experience and familiarity with your defenseman. Now that he's had it, we're seeing every single month. Kemper gets sharper. He gets better. The goals against go down. The save percentage goes up. And up until 2 weeks ago, he was as good as anybody in the league in the prior probably 6 weeks. So a rolling sort of total. Kemper's gotten better as the season's gone along with this little blip. And that's, I think, to be expected because the longer he's with the same guys, the better he tends to get. Because as you can imagine, at 6'5", at his size, you can't really be super reactive. There's no diving from side to side like you used to see with Semyon Varlamov, for example, sort of leaping from post to post. You just can't do it if you're Kemper. So fatigue, no, I'm not terribly worried. And I think the way he's played is good, although you sure would like to see him come out and have one really good game before the playoffs start, because the last couple for the Avs, and obviously they weren't all Kemper, but they haven't been very sharp.
Get that confidence level back up just a little bit. A lot of people have discussed that if the Avs do not win the Stanley Cup this year, this whole season is a disappointment. John Davis brought up a good point to me when I was on the air with him on Sunday morning. And he said, but is it a disappointment if they just make it to the Stanley Cup Finals? If they don't win it, but they just make it, would this season still be considered a disappointment?
I sincerely hope not. I think people are underrating how difficult it is to get to the Stanley Cup Finals. The Avs have won 2 Stanley Cups. They've gotten there twice. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. It's a very difficult sport to get to the Stanley Cup. If they get there and were to lose, I'd say it has to be considered a success. Where I think it's a failure or not is if they don't end up in the Western Conference Finals. They have to get past that second round. They have to be able to get to the Western Conference Finals. They have to prove they can do that. If they can get to the Western Conference Finals, I think the season is a success. Now, are they the best team in the league? They're probably right there with Florida. So should they win? Probably. But you could make the argument every year in virtually every sport. Did the very best team win the championship? It just doesn't always work that way. In fact, a lot of the times it doesn't. But to my mind, Western Conference Finals or bust, yes, that's got to be the low water mark. And of course, if you want to get this any further along, then it works out for the better. But I I'm just not one of those folks that looks at sports and say, if you didn't win the championship, the whole season's a waste. I just don't think that's a particularly healthy way to think about it, whether you're a fan or a player or a coach or even a front office person in sports. You just can't think that absolutely, because there are things that happen outside of your control.
Well, let's just hope that we're not even having to have this conversation in a couple of weeks. Sean, appreciate all your insight and your time. Thank you again.
Anytime. And we'll be on tonight, right after the Avs and Blues, immediately after that final horn with the Fans Postgame Show.
All righty. We love it. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Face Off, presented by 104 The Fan. That's us. Hello. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. We're back tomorrow morning, 10:30 a.m. for coffee break. Come hang out with us. Bye, everyone.